This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Bruchim Abom, welcome everyone. Good Erev Shabbos, Parsha Shmini. Want to welcome all of the Torah Anytime viewers. Want to welcome everyone listening on J-Root Radio. And of course, all the great Talmid Chachamim here in Young Israel of Kew Garden Hills, New York. Okay, so this is Parsha Shmini, the first week after Pesach. And of course, Minhag Yisrael is that we begin saying Pirkei Avos in the first Shabbos after Pesach. In fact, the Ramah brings down that there is a minhag which is not as well kept as Pirkei Avos to say after Mincha Shabbos the Barchi Nafshis of the Tehillim. One of the reasons is we don't officially learn on Shabbos after Mincha. There's such a concept because that was the Petira of Moshe Rabbeinu. So out of respect, we know when a Chacham dies, Batloi Beis HaMedrash, so we either say the Tehillim or we learn Pirkei Avos to be Mechabein Moshe Rabbeinu, because Pirkei Avos begins Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai. So we want to discuss a few interesting inyanim today. First of all, why do we specifically begin to learn Pirkei Avos the Shabbos right after Pesach? How does Pesach, so to speak, kick off Pirkei Avos? You know, it's interesting, there's like a buffer zone. You have the weeks that you say the Barchi Nafshis. The Shabbos before Pesach, you take a break. That's when you say the Haggadah. And then you begin Pirkei Avos right after Pesach. What's the inyan to begin Pirkei Avos right after Pesach? Let's also discuss the following. We know the Gemara tells us in Yevamos, Samach Beis, Amud Beis. The Gemara is on number 8 on your sheets. The Gemara says that Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 pairs of Talmidim from Givas Ad until Antiparis, and they all died during one Tekufa because Shaloi Noagu Kavoid Zelazeh. The world was desolate until Rabbi Akiva taught the 5 Chachamim in the south, Rameir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua. The way I remember it is Meisha, but like a Litvak. Meisha, Mem Yud Yud Shin Aleph. That's how you remember the 5 Talmidim. Somebody asked, who are Rabbi Akiva's 5 Talmidim? It's very easy to remember. You know, Rameir, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Elazar. Meisha. Anyway, that's just, side point. Anyway, the Gemara says, Tana Kula Mesu, they all died, Mi Pesach V'Yad Atzeres, from Pesach until Shavuos. That's certainly significant. Why would they specifically die during this time of the year? We don't find that they necessarily showed more of a lack of respect during these 49 days. Why would they die specifically during the Mei HaSfira? Also, why specifically Talmidim Rabbi Akiva? Did they really treat each other with less respect than Talmidim of other Rabbeim? It was only them, only Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim? Let's try to explain that a little bit. Again, we want to know what Pirkei Avos has to do with this man of the year. We want to try to understand why the Talmid of Rabbi Akiva died specifically this time of the year, and why specifically the Talmid of Rabbi Akiva. Okay, so let's begin learning Pirkei Avos. We're going to focus on Mishnah Vav. Yeshua ben Prachya v'nitai harbeli kiblu mehem. Yeshua ben Prachya oimer aseh lecha rav. You got to make for yourself a rabbi. Very important thing. You have to make for yourself a rabbi. Now, what do you mean make for yourself a rabbi? Either he is or he's not. No. See, in this generation, everyone understands that. Yeah, I daven in that shul, but he's not my rabbi. If a guy could not be your president, then kal v'chomer, you could have a guy who's not your rabbi. So you have to make him your rabbi. It's a psychological process where the Rishonim, right? Rabbeinu Yonah and the Rambam say it a little differently. I believe Rabbeinu Yonah says even if he's not as great as, even if he's not greater than you, he's equal to you. But psychologically, everybody needs a Rebbe, so you make him your Rebbe. I believe the Rambam says even if he's on a lower madrega than you, still you actively make him a Rebbe. The famous Satmar Rebbe. The Satmar Rebbe says Gemara begins on Daf Beis. What happened to Daf Aleph? Daf Aleph is Aseh Lecha Rav. Before you start learning, you have to have a Rebbe. And then you could start with Daf Beis. Anyway, now why Aseh Lecha Rav? Why not Knei Lecha Rav? A friend that says you could buy Knei Lecha Rav. That would work out. Knei Lecha Rav. The answer is a Rav that you could be Knei. You don't want that kind of Rav. Aseh Lecha Rav. You got to make him your Rebbe. Knei Lecha Chaver. V'havadan es kol ha'adam l'kaf schus. Judge everybody favorably.
What I say is that someone that you learn from, you becomes your Rabbi, or you make someone a Rabbi. If you learn from somebody.
It's a certain hachna where your person says, even though this person, maybe I'm greater than him, I know more than him, but to be able to learn from somebody, you make him your Rabbi. Someone said from Rav Miller, Say l'charav, uknei l'cha chaver. The problem is, I try to make him my Rabbi, but this time he did this thing wrong, and that time he did that thing wrong, and this time he didn't know this. So the Mishnah says, you want to keep him as your Rabbi, v'havedanas kala adam l'kav schos. Okay, but there is a very ingenious approach to understanding this Mishnah. And the Mishnah says, v'havedan es kol ha'adam l'kav zchos. Doesn't say v'havedan kol ha'adam l'kav zchos. Es kol. S is Bala Rabbis. S is Bala Rabbis. What does it mean? V'havedan. Should say v'havedan kol ha'adam l'kav schos. What does it mean? Es kol ha'adam l'kav schos. So the Avodas Yisrael, the Kashnut Magid says, B'derech Chasidus, he says the word es is extra. So he says like this: V'hakavana b'zeh shekeshayira eza inyanim olam hazeh. He says really an amazing concept, something that we probably recognize intuitively, but it's kedai to spell it out. Whenever you see something in this world, you see somebody doing an avera. Let's say you're walking down the street, you see a guy kill someone. You see chas v'shalom. You see a blatant avera. As I taskel v'taven, you should understand, ki lo yalchinam balachazos. It's not for naught that God made you see this. Tachas einecha. Why do I have to see this guy doing ritzicha, or this guy speaking lashon hara, or this guy doing this avera? Why do I need to see this guy in back of me talking by davening, which is like murder, right? So why do I have to see that? Why can't I mind my own?
Why do you have to hear it?
What? Why do I have to hear it? It must be the Rebbe Shem is trying to give me musar. That what? That I was also nichshal in that. Yeah, but I never murdered someone. But but maybe I embarrassed somebody once. Or let's say I see somebody serving Avodah Zarah. Yeah, but I never served that. But maybe I once got angry. So says Avodah Zarah, "V'hainu sheyazger es atzmai." Remind yourself, "Ulai asa gamkein b'pam achar," because maybe one time I did something like this. Oy be'eza inyan achar hakarvas, or something of the like. Kagain. I think what he means is, if you see somebody serving Avodah Zarah, you should ask yourself, why is Rebbe Shalom giving me this sight? Must be I was nichshol in this inyan on some small degree. And then a person should do tshuva. That's what it means. Es kol ha'adam l'kav schus. Es means Kamay im kol ha'adam kedei shetavay lekav schus shetashav. He reads it like this: V'havadan, you should judge es kol, everything that you see in your life lekav schus, to bring you to do tshuva. Okay, it's maybe not al derech hapshat, but the idea I think is a very notable idea, a noteworthy idea, and that is whenever you see something, you shouldn't say, I don't know, very interesting, very, I saw something very unusual today. But you should take it the next step and say, why did I encounter this? Why did this happen to me? Why did I see this? What message is Rebbe Shalom sending me? And if a person does that, he will bring himself l'kav schos. It will bring a person to do tshuva. Okay, so this idea sort of set me in a certain mode of thought that everybody believes in hashgacha pratis, but we don't necessarily take it this way and say, why did I just see that interesting car pass by? Why did I just see that person? The Rebbe Shalom sends us messages. We don't always ask ourselves, what's the Rebbe Shalom trying to tell me? But then I realized that this is an idea which is a very overarching idea. And it's an idea that's brought in the Sefer Chasidus, but it's also brought more in by the Gaonim. The Polish Gaonim uses to explain certain Gemaras. And they use in the following vein. You find in the Gemara that this Tana made this drasha, and that Tana said this drasha. You ever ask yourself, why was Rabbi Akiva the one to make this drasha? Why was Rav Tarfon the one to say this? If you realize that nothing in life is coincidence, then you're really entitled to ask why every teaching is attributed to that particular Tana or Amoira. So there's a famous idea But let's begin in the following way. We know that Shimon Hamsuni and Nehemiah Hamsuni, they were specialists. Nowadays everyone's a specialist. Yeah, nobody knows how to do anything because everything is so, specialized that, it's not anybody's specialty. But back then, they were specialists in darshaning the word S. They had a drasha for every S. And they had one problem. They got to the pasuk, Es Hashem lekecha tira, and the question is that they had was, who else do you need to fear other than God? So what they do? They threw in the towel and they said, our specialty is wrong. We went to the wrong trade. We knew we should have become accountants like our grandmother told us. And they decided to throw in the towel and remove their whole life's mission. They took they had probably had thousands of books, S volume 1, S volume 2, S volume 3, S volume 4, and they took it and they put it in the attic, never to look at again, ad Shabbat Rabbi Akiva. Until Rabbi Akiva came, V'darash Es Hashem Elokecha Tira L'Rabbois Talmidei Chachamim. Rabbi Akiva said, no, you know who is on par with God? You know who is equal to God? You know who else you have to fear besides your Moshe? Talmidei Chachamim. So now the question is, you need a Rabbi Akiva to teach me that? How come nobody else realized that? Not Hillel, not Shammai, not Rav Tarfon, nobody. Nobody realized that Talmid Chacham is like the Yivamshi. You need a Rabbi Akiva. How many Tanam were there? There were hundreds of Tanam. Why Dafka Rabbi Akiva? So I came across an amazing thing from Hagoyin Haggadah Rabbi Yosef Engel, one of the greatest of the Polish Hagoyinim, and he was a Baki Nifla B'chal Tarakul. He's the author of Gilyoinei Hashas. He's the author of Shev de Nechemta, Oitzrois Yosef, Asvan Dairaisa, Beis HaOitzar, and he, if I'm not mistaken, Rav Hutner's father took Rav Hutner to visit Rabbi Yosef Engel when when Rav Hutner was a little boy, and he came to the house. Rabbi Yosef Engel was napping. The Rebbetzin let them in the room, and in his sleep, he was with the thumb while he was sleeping. Okay. Anyway, Rabbi Yosef Engel quotes a concept of none other than the Baal Shem Tov. On the pasuk, Kel Nekamais Hashem, Kel Nekamais Haifiyah. Hashem is the Lord of vengeance, the Lord of vengeance who reveals himself. So what does this mean? Kel Nekamais Hashem, Kel Nekamais Haifiyah. So the Baal Shem Tov gave the following mashal. There was a villager who rebelled against the king, and this villager stoned and smacked the statue of the king. So, he's a Mard B'Malchus. King should kill him. No, the king didn't touch him. You know what the king did? The king did better. He elevated this guy to be second in command. And the more the king elevated him, and the higher the king brought him, every time the guy remembered what he did to the statue of the king, he was so utterly ashamed, he was so embarrassed. That was the biggest revenge the king had. Instead of killing the guy, the king elevated him, revealed himself, showed this villager his greatness, his majesty, and that shamed the villager even more. Well, the king did it intentionally. Because if the king would have killed him, it would have been, you killed him, and that's the end of his misery. But this was a constant tsar that the king inflicted on this person. So says the Baal Shem Tov, this is the meaning of Kel Nekames Hashem. God is the Lord of vengeance. How does he do it? He doesn't do it with wrath. He does it with rachamim. How's that? Now a Melech Basar V'Dam doesn't do what that king did. No Melech Basar V'Dam would elevate and promote somebody who insults him. But that's what the Rebbe Shalom does. When somebody sins against God, God gives him an extra dose of Hakara of Hashem, so that the person should have more busha uchlima to be able to have a tikkun for the chet that he did. This is what the Talmud Yaakov Yosef writes that he heard from the Baal Shem Tov. Also in the Sefer Orach L'Chaim of Rav Ram Chaim Mizolochav, he brings that he heard the same exact thing from the Baal Shem Tov.
The difference is not to punish him in order to make them do tshuva.
In order to have a tikkun, in order to do tshuva. Yeah. So comes Rabbi Yosef Engel, and he says, Oyom v'noira. Why was Rabbi Akiva the one to darshan, Es Hashem Elokecha Tira l'Rabbis Talmidei Chachamim. Why was Rabbi Akiva the only one who had the highest hakara of the greatness of a Talmid Chacham until he understood a Talmid Chacham was on the Madrega of Hashem? Says Rabbi Yosef Engel, based on the Baal Shem Tov, that the way the Ribbon Shem operates in this world is when a person is Nisrashel and Nichshal, the Ribbon Shem gives him an extra understanding of that inyan to give him an understanding so that he's more ashamed of it to be able to do tshuva. That we know Rabbi Akiva, even though he was the greatest of the Tanoim, he wasn't always so great. In fact, the Gemara Pesachim says, Tanya Amar Rabbi Akiva, Kishahayisi Amaretz. When I used to be unlearned, Amarti, I would say, Mi yiten li Talmid Chacham. Who's going to give me a Talmid Chacham? I want to bite his head off like a donkey. So his Talmidim said, why didn't you say like a dog? He said, no, donkeys are worse. So as great as Rabbi Akiva was, and by the way, we know, even when Rabbi Akiva was unlearned, he always had good midos. And Rabbi Akiva Eger says, you see from here, that if someone doesn't learn Torah, even if they're a good person, they're going to hate rabbis. That's just the thing, that's the reality of life. That, first of all, if somebody doesn't like rabbis, so that's symptomatic that they don't know anything. And if somebody could be a good person, they could be a good person. Rabbi Akiva was a very good guy. He was a very nice guy. He had a good heart. He had a good Jewish heart. And he gave to the UJA a lot of money. And he had a lot of manners and etiquette. And he was a very nice person, but he was an Amaris, so he hated rabbis. So says Yosef Engel, Mamish Ayam Anoira. You know why Rabbi Akiva was the one who darshan the Hashem Elokecha Tira l'Rabbis Talmidei Chachamim as an oynesh? Because since he was nichshal and he was weak and he was nisrashel, he didn't appreciate the value of Talmidei Chachamim. In order for Rabbi Akiva to have a proper tshuva, the Ribbon Shem gave him the deepest understanding of the value of Talmidei Chacham more than anybody else, so that he should be nisbayesh and embarrassed that when he was a when he was Amaretz, he didn't appreciate Talmidei Chachamim. In other words, along this train of thought, that Kel Nekames Hashem, Kel Nekames Sophia, the Ribbon Shem gave Rabbi Akiva an extra dose of the hasaga, of the greatness of a Talmid Chacham, in order that he be nizbayesh about what he used to say, Kisha Yisi Amaretz Amarti Miyiten Li Talmid Chacham Anashchenu Kechamar. Look at number 7. This comes from the Sefer Shev Dinechemta of Rabbi Yosef Engel. He says, I explained in my Agadata many different interpretations why Rabbi Akiva Davka Darshand Es L'Rabbis Talmidei Chachamim. Why is that? Rabbi Akiva was given, he says on the third line, Hasaga Yisera Ba'oitza Madregas Hamicham Mashalo Haya Hasaga Zos L'Shar Chachamim. Why? V'alkein Shapir Rakhu Hechshiva Lehachachamim. What does that say? Okay, only he was able to be marbeh Talmidei Chachamim by Yiras Hashem. The meaning is like this. He quotes about Shem Tov on the Pshat that he says, Kel Nekames Hashem, Kel Nekames Haifiyah, and then he says about 16 lines down, about Pizeh Biarti. Based on this, I explain B'makom Shabalei Tshuva Oimdim Tzadikim Gumar Meinu Michalim Lamoid, where Bali Tshuva stand, great tzaddikim cannot stand. Why? This villager, Ki HaKafri Hazeh, this villager, Asher Machnisim Oisai El Chadrei HaMelech, that we bring him into the chambers of the king. Umarim Loi Gedulas HaMelech, and they show him the greatness of the Melech. Ach Leman Hanishay Bezeh, they just show it to him to punish him. Because until he realized and appreciated the greatness of the king, he wasn't so embarrassed what he did. But once the more he understands the greatness of the king, the more his pain is magnified. Then it's possible comes out like this, that a guy who's loyal to the king never saw the majesty of the king as much as someone who is disloyal to the king in this mashal, right? It's only the people who are not loyal to the king, they're given an extra dose of privilege to see the majesty of the king in order that they be ashamed of what they did. this is what it means that where Balei Tshuva stand, Tzadikim Gemurim never stand. A Tzadik Gamor, God may never show them a higher level of His greatness, because He doesn't need to. But the Baal Tshuva who slipped up and rebelled against Hashem, Hashem may give them extra hasaga of His will, of His majesty, in order that they become ashamed of what they did. It says Rabbi Yosef Engel, this is what it means, Gedoyla Tshuva Shemagasa Kisei HaKavod. What does it mean, Gedoyla Tshuva Shemagasa Kisei HaKavod? That Hashem is Megale to someone who does Tshuva, the glory of His Kisei, so that the person is facilitated and able to do Tshuva. Now Rabbi Akiva, now let's get to the upshot over here. Rabbi Akiva said when he was in Am Haaretz, Mi yitein li Talmid Chacham v'anashchenu kechamar. But then when Rabbi Akiva became a Talmid Chacham, and he for sure did Tshuva on the fact that he hated Talmid Chachamim, well, based on this idea of the Baal Shem Tov, part of his punishment and part of his einish was that Hashem revealed to him, He was moifia to him, the gadlus of Talmidei Chachamim, so that he should have an extra dose of tsar. How could it be that I hated these people? Vim Kain, it could be the reason why he had an extra dose of appreciation of Talmidei Chachamim more than anyone else is because the Rebbe Shem gave it to him as a gift to help him have the busha of his past. So true, the other Chachamim were afraid. The other Chacham would never dare to say, "As Hashem lekachatira l'Rabbi Samei Chachamim." They never had that hasaga of Talmid Chacham. But Rabbi Akiva was given this extra dose of hasaga of the greatness and the majesty of Talmid Chachamim. Maybe we could say, if we may, a little bit less dramatic than what Rabbi Yosef Engel is saying, based on the Baal Shem Tov. In other words, let's try to understand for a moment, why was Rabbi Akiva the only one who appreciated the value of Talmid Chachamim? Is it that Rebbe Shem gave him miraculously this extra dose of understanding the greatness of Talmid Chachamim so that he could have an extra measure of embarrassment for what he used to do? Or could we just say, maybe on a simpler level, what was Rabbi Akiva's biggest shortcoming when he was in Am Haaretz? Lack of appreciation of Talmidei Chachamim. So probably, when he did Tshuva, in what area did he work on himself the most? Probably he worked on himself more than anything else on appreciating the chashivos of Talmidei Chachamim. After all, Rabbeinu Yonah writes that one of the 20 steps of tshuva is to correct the misdeed measure for measure in what you were nichshal. So, for example, Rabbeinu Yonah writes, if a person stumbled with their eyes, they should try to use their eyes to see kedusha, to see Torah. And if a person sinned with their hand, they should try to do mitzvahs with their arms. And if a person did bundles of averos, so quid pro quo, you try to correct it measure for measure. So isn't it reasonable that if Rabbi Akiva's main shortcoming was that he did not evaluate and appreciate the greatness of Talmidei Chacham, as part of his tshuva and a part of his learning, he probably focused and emphasized and put in extra amelos and extra effort to appreciate the value of Talmidei Chachamim, to the point where Rabbi Akiva said, aha! Now, yes, I'm going to be the one who's able to darshan as Hashem Elokecha Tira l'Rabbi Samei, because he put in the effort and the amelos and the focus in that area. So we don't have to say as mystical and supernatural that Hashem came down and gave him this extra hasagam and hashamayim of the greatness of Chachamim. This is the way Rabbi Akiva probably did tshuva. This was the measures that he took. And probably, Rabbi Isai, in the yeshiva of Rabbi Akiva, what do you think was one of the main ideas and concepts that he emphasized to his Talmidim?
Respect on the Chacham.
Kavod Talmidei Chacham. Are you kidding me? Rabbi Akiva, look, you see how he worked on himself. You see it was very central in the worldview of Rabbi Akiva, the greatness and the chashivas of Talmidei Chacham. He's the one who darshan as Hashem Elokecha Tira l'Rabbi Talmidei Chacham. You can imagine in Rabbi Akiva's yeshiva, the shmuzin he gave, the speeches he gave, what he taught his Talmidim were Kavod Talmidei Chacham, Kavod Talmidei Chacham, Kavod Talmidei. Do you really think the students of Rabbi Akiva respected each other less than other students? I would say no. I would say Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim respected each other more than the students of other Talmidei Chacham. After all, that was the main lima that the Rebbe gave over. But because that was their Rebbe's point of excellence, in other words, Rabbi Akiva reached the madrega of Kavod Talmidei Chacham more than any other Tana. As evident from the fact he's the only one who is able to darshan as Hashem leikecha tira l'Rabbi Talmidei Chachamim, and therefore we could suggest that it's his talmidim who are held much more accountable to show kavod zelazeh than anybody else.
And they failed.
Lefi madregasam kechud asayra. In other words, the talmidim of other tanoim, they maybe respect each other less, but they didn't have the expectations that the students Rabbi Akiva had. After all, Rabbi Akiva is the one who taught the world. Talmidei Chachamim are on par with the Rebbeinu Shem. As Hashem Elokecha Tira, the rabbis Talmidei Chachamim.
So Rabbi, they failed so dramatically that they were chayav misa?
Okay, so now let's try to develop this a little bit. In other words, what I'm doing is I'm basing myself off Rabbi Yosef Engel. Rabbi Yosef Engel says his idea al pi Chasidus, al pi Kabbalah, but we're saying it more al pi Pshat. That Rabbi Akiva, in order to be Masakein, his infraction of Kishayisi Amaretz Amarti Miyitin Li Tamacham Hashchanu Kechamar, Rabbi Akiva, to correct that, he always emphasized Chashivas Talmidei Chachamim. Okay, so let's talk about a very interesting thing. When is the time of the year that brings refuahs to the world? So there's an interesting Gemara in Shabbos on Daf Kuf Mem Zayin. Look at number 9. Tashma, the Amar Shmuel, Kulhu Shakyaini, all elixirs, all medicine, midivcha v'yadatzar tamali. They work well between Pesach and Shavuos. So you see a very important thing from here. That usually medicine doesn't work. Right? That's the first thing you see. Halavai, you should survive the medicine you take, all the side effects that it does, right? The best medicine is not to take medicine. But you didn't hear it from me. Okay, don't listen to that. That's off the record. But the Gemara says that all, right, besides us sitting in the room and whoever's watching and listening on the radio, just keep it to yourself, right? But the Gemara says that all elixirs work from Pesach till Shavuos. Interesting. Says the Heilige Chassam Sofer.
Also mean that you should get treated if you have a malady in there during that time?
Yeah, it's a good time. It's a time of refuahs. In fact, what month comes out between Pesach and Shavuos? Iyar. What does Iyar stand for? Ani Hashem Roifecha. So anybody needs a refuah, now's the time Yibon Hashem can send a refuah. Shalema, Bekaroi, B'mheira, take of Meyad. Ani Hashem Roifecha.
So there's other.
Ani Hashem Roifecha.
That's when you need it the most because you've been doing so much eating on Pesach.
Whatever the reason is, it's a time of refuahs. Soon.
Wednesday.
Okay.
Oh, the same thing.
But there's even though, it's an interesting thing. So it's a time of refuah, right? There's only one thing in this world there's no refuah for. Says the Gemara in Shabbos on Daf Kuf Yates. Amar Yehuda lecharva Yushalayim ela b'shvil shabizu ba Talmidei Chachamim. Yerushalayim was destroyed because they did not respect Talmidei Chachamim. Amar Yehuda Amar Rav kol hamavaza Talmid Chacham ein loy refuah l'makasai. Anyone who is mavaza Talmid Chacham, there's no refuah for his makkah. So I found in a sefer of the sefer Avnei Nachal, I think it's a contemporary sefer, that why dafka during this time of the year did Talmidei Rabbi Akiva pass away? Well, we know that their infraction was Shalei Noagu Kavod Zelazeh. And even though this time of the year is a time of refuah, it's a time of the year of refuah, but dafka the Yibon Hashem wanted to show that during the time of the year of refuah, you can't, this infraction, there's no refuah for. This infraction of Shalei Nagu Kavod Zelazeh ain't refuah l'makasai. That's why Yibon Hashem specifically took them away at a time of refuah to demonstrate la koil yesh refuah chutz mizu. During this time of the year, when there's a refuah for everything, there ain't no refuah for this.
Was it in one season or 2 years? In one year?
What?
Was it in 1 year?
It could be over a course of many years. But dafka during this time of the year.
Was for Ruchnias also?
For Ruchnias? L'chaira? Yeah, I guess so. So we would say that, the physical world is a reflection of the spiritual world as well. Ani Hashem Roifecha, right, is refuas hanefesh or refuas haguf, I guess we would be saying. Okay, so I saw a very interesting thing. So we're going to tweak this also. We're going to borrow it and tweak it. Why dafka during this time of the year? Well, I saw there's one of the classic Haggadahs, the Haggadah Vayagid Moshe. But the Vayagid Moshe also wrote a commentary on Pirkei Avos, and he suggests one of the reasons why we learn Pirkei Avos specifically after Pesach. So let's understand. Why did we have a Pesach? Why did we go down to Mitzrayim in the first place? What chait was done? So there's an interesting Gemara in Nedarim. The Gemara in Nedarim says that the chait was Avram Avinu did not treat Talmidei Chachamim properly. How's that? He went to war to rescue Lot from the 4 kings. The problem that Avram Avinu made the mistake he made was he drafted Talmidei Chachamim into his army. You can't draft Talmidei Chachamim into your army. So says the Gemara Nedarim, because Avram Avinu took Talmidei Chachamim and drafted them into his chayal, because of that, we had to go down to Mitzrayim only 210 years and be brutalized, and 80% of our people were lost. Says the Gemara Nedarim, Amar Rav Avo, Amar Rav Lazar, Meiman Nenash Avram Avinu, V'nishtabdu banav l'Mitzrayim, Masayim be'eser shanim, V'mnei sha'asa angaria b'Talmidei Chachamim.
But yes, Shomrim. Some say you took Eliezer alone. That's yes, Shomrim only.
This is what Rabbi Avos said in the name of Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Avos is a big man. He could bring the dead back to life. So we'll take his word for it, right? That's what Rabbi Avos said. Rabbi Avos said the reason why we went down to Mitzrayim is because Avraham Avinu used Talmidei Chachamim in his army. So the Sefer Vayagid Moshe says like this. If understanding things in this line, he says that during the Yemei Pesach, it should remind a person what brought us into this mess, what needs to be corrected. And apparently, the Shibud of Mitzrayim came as a result of lack of chashivas for Talmidei Chachamim. And therefore he says, because of this Aveira, Avram Avinu was punished, and there was a whole shibud. So he says like this. He wants to say Pshat in the Haggadah, Va'afilu kulanu chachamim, kulanu nevainim, kulanu yoidim es ha'torah, mitzvah aleinu l'saper b'yitzias Mitzrayim. Shkoyach. Do we need someone to say, Va'afilu kulanu chachamim, kulanu nevainim, mitzvah aleinu lechal kosher. V'chol ha'oichal kosher hareza meshubach. I need to say that, Talmidei Chacham need to eat kosher food. Now you say, Afilu kulanu chacham, kulanu yoidim es ha'torah, mitzvah aleinu shaloi l'rtzayach. V'chol she'eino rotzayach hareza meshubach. I mean, we know, you got to keep the Torah. Why would you think Talmidei Chachamim don't have to be mesaper b'tzias Mitzrayim? The answer is, the whole purpose of Shibud Mitzrayim and the Gula was to teach the chashivas of Talmidei Chachamim. So Talmidei Chachamim, they don't have to do anything. You would think they're exempt from the whole mitzvah. No, the chiddush is, even Talmidei Chachamim, who the reason for the Shib and the Gula doesn't apply to, even they have to speak about it.
They also have to respect each other.
They also, right. Yeah. And maybe that's the reason. So therefore, during this time of the year, this is a time of the year where people enhance their appreciation of Talmidei Chachamim. So during the rest of the year, you can't learn Pirkei Avos. Nobody's going to listen to the Pirkei Avos. Nobody's going to listen to the Chachamim. But during this time of the year, after Pesach, where it wakes people up a little bit, what got us into the mess in the first place, Avram Avinu was not mechabed the Talmidei Chachamim. So now is a good time. You give them a few weeks, where they could get in what they need to say. But Marv Rabbi, according to that, we understand then why the Talmidei Chachamim, why the Talmidei Rabbi Akiva were specifically taken to task this time of the year. This is the Yom Tov of Pesach, based on what we're saying. One of the lessons and one of the limudim is the proper chashivos and the proper value that Talmidei Chachamim have to have. Not only that people have to have for Talmidei Chachamim, but that Talmidei Chachamim have to have for each other. So that's why all of us Talmidei Chachamim over here, myself excluded, that we try to show each other proper chashivos. But this is the time of the year, after the Yom Tov of Pesach, when we're reminded of the limud that Avram Avinu was punished, that he made angaria b'Talmidei Chachamim. And possibly this is the reason why this was the time of the year that the Talmidei Rabbi Akiva were held accountable. But I think it's a very significant thought that we're offering, that why was it that Rabbi Akiva was the one who taught the world as Hashem lekecha l'rabbis Talmidei Chachamim? Because this was Rabbi Akiva's personal tikkun for what he said, Mi'yiten li Talmid Chacham ba'anashchenu kechamar, his tshuva and his gadlus was b'makayim. The Rabbeinu Yonah writes b'makayim meshuvasai u'makayim tshuvasai, where he was able to correct the place of his infraction, and possibly that's why his talmidim were held more accountable, specifically in this inyan, because this became the focus of their great Rabbi Akiva, and this is something that we should take with us during this season of the year, and use it to be able to prepare for Kabbalas HaTorah, Haba Aleinu L'Tov. I wish everyone Agun Shabbos.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.